I was halfway through repainting the trim on my tool shed when I heard the high heels of doom clicking down the sidewalk. I didn't even have to look up to know who it was. Verona Ashwick, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, was marching straight toward me with a folder in one hand and her signature frown in the other. August, she barked my name like it offended her just to say it. We need to talk about that structure. I set my brush down carefully, wiped my hands on a rag, and turned to face her. You mean my shed? Verona narrowed her eyes like I just called her a name. Tool shed, she corrected, as if that made some dramatic difference. Article 7, Section C of the HOA guidelines clearly states that all outbuildings must be pre-approved by the board. Yours isn't. I exhaled slowly. It's been here for over a year. No one said anything until now. I just found out about it, she said, voice clipped and sharp. And now that I know, you have 30 days to remove it or face daily fines. I looked past her at the little building. I built that shed with my own 2 hands. Nailed every board, laid the concrete foundation, painted it to match the house. It wasn't a rickety eyesore. It was functional, clean, and solid. There's nothing wrong with it, Verona. It's not even visible from the street. That's not the point, she snapped. You broke the rules. She turned on her heel and left, but not before shoving a folded notice into my hand. I watched her walk away, her white blouse tucked too tightly into her skirt, her hair pulled back in that aggressive bun she always wore like a helmet. Verona wasn't just part of the HOA, she practically was the HOA, and she loved reminding people of it. I unfolded the paper. It was an official violation notice signed by 3 board members. Daily fines of $50 would hit me starting in 30 days if I didn't tear it down. Thing is, I knew Verona. I knew her type. She didn't care about rules. She cared about control. Now, maybe I should have taken it to the board and tried to reason with them, but something told me this wasn't just about the shed. Verona and I had butted heads before. Last Christmas, I put up a few extra lights and she left me a note saying they were tacky and intrusive. When I hosted a barbecue on the 4th of July, she called the fire department over unpermitted flame sources. They showed up, saw my legal propane grill, and left shaking their heads. So no, this wasn't about a shed. This was about Verona trying to win some imaginary war she thought we were in. And I wasn't about to lose. That night, I went online and pulled up the county's land parcel map. I'd remembered something weird about the HOA's common lot, the one where they held their little bake sales and monthly meetings under tents. It was a scrap of land at the end of the cul-de-sac. Dead grass, a rusted picnic table, and a cracked concrete slab. I remembered a for sale sign there last year. Curious, I clicked through the property records and nearly dropped my beer. The HOA didn't own that land. It was still owned by a real estate trust that had gone belly up years ago. The HOA had been using it unofficially this whole time, assuming no one would care. I grinned. This was going to be fun. The next morning, I called the county recorder's office and confirmed what I'd seen. Then I made a few calls, looped in a buddy of mine from my days working maintenance at the city hall. Within a week, I was in contact with the bank that had inherited the land through foreclosure. They were more than happy to offload it for cheap. $5,000, the guy on the phone said. You cover the closing costs, and it's yours. I didn't even hesitate. I'd spent more than that building the shed. 2 weeks later, the deed arrived in the mail, and I became the proud owner of the little triangle of land the HOA had been squatting on for years. I waited until their next meeting before I made my move. It was the first Saturday of the month. I watched from across the street as Verona rolled up with her folding table and her plastic bin of clipboards. A few of the other board members, her usual sidekicks, were already setting up chairs. I let them get comfortable. Then I walked across the street with a rolled-up sign under my arm and a fresh copy of the deed in my hand. Morning, Verona, I said, smiling like I didn't have a nuclear bomb in my back pocket. She glanced up and gave me that tight, disapproving look. This is a private meeting, August. It won't be for long, I said, and unfolded the sign. It read, Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Verona stared at it like it was written in a foreign language. You're joking, she said. I pulled out the deed and held it up. Nope. Just bought the land. Closed last week. Got the paperwork right here if you want to take a look. She snatched it from my hand like she thought she could will it into being fake. Her eyes scanned the page, and I watched her face turn a shade redder with every line she read. This is a violation of, actually, I cut her off. It's not. You guys never owned this land. You've been using it illegally. I'm just enforcing the law. You know, like you tried to do with my shed. You can't do this, she hissed. I can, I said. And I am. You're all trespassing right now. You'll regret this, she snapped. I leaned in a little closer. No, Verona. You will. The board members started packing up fast after that. Some of them looked more embarrassed than anything. A couple gave me apologetic nods. Verona, though, she just glared daggers as she stormed off. I spent the rest of the weekend putting up a proper fence around the lot. Nothing fancy. Just enough to make the point clear. 2 days later, I installed a camera and a no trespassing sign with my name and phone number at the bottom. That should have been the end of it. But Verona doesn't know how to lose quietly. 3 days later, I got a call from the city. Apparently, someone had filed a zoning complaint against my shed, claimed it encroached on the neighbor's property line, didn't have a permit, and posed a structural safety hazard. I knew exactly who it was. But what Verona didn't know was that I had every permit filed and approved. I'd even paid extra to have a city inspector sign off on it when I built it. So I invited the inspector over again, just for the show. He took one look, flipped through his tablet, and laughed. This is textbook, August. Whoever reported this is wasting our time. He left, and I waved at the camera I'd installed on the new fence because I had a feeling Verona was watching. But she wasn't done. The next week, I noticed someone had spray-painted cheater across my shed in red. That's when I knew she'd crossed the line. I called the cops, filed a report, turned over the footage from my security cam. And sure enough, there she was, Verona herself, in a hoodie and sunglasses, sneaking onto my property at 2 in the morning with a can of spray paint. The officer who took the report was polite but firm. This is criminal mischief, Mr. Jensen. We'll handle it. And they did. 2 days later, a police cruiser showed up at Verona's house, and she was arrested on the spot. 3 days after Verona was led off her porch in handcuffs, the neighborhood was buzzing louder than a lawnmower on a Sunday morning. People who'd never spoken to me before were waving as they walked their dogs. Someone even left a pound cake on my porch with a note that just said, "Thank you." No signature, just a thick slice of gratitude. I didn't bother asking who it was. I had a feeling most of the neighborhood had been too scared or too tired to stand up to Verona before. Now that someone had cracked her polished shell, they were coming out of the woodwork like survivors from a storm cellar. By Thursday, Verona had posted bail and returned home. No press conference, no apology, just a curt wave to the mailman and drawn curtains. But the arrest had rattled her. For the first time in years, she wasn't strutting around like she owned the place. She hadn't even posted the usual HOA bulletins on the community board near the mailbox cluster. On Saturday morning, I noticed something unusual. An unfamiliar SUV parked outside my house. A man in a blazer stepped out, mid-40s, sharply dressed, the kind of guy who probably had cufflinks with his initials engraved on them. He walked up my driveway and waited at the edge of the porch. "August Jensen?" he asked. I nodded, wiping sawdust off my hands. I'd been installing a new set of shelves inside the shed's sturdy oak with adjustable brackets. "I'm Daniel Lark. I represent the firm Hallow and Messer. I've been retained by the Oak Summit Homeowners Association." "Retained?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "What for?" He took a breath like he was about to recite a script. "The HOA believes your recent acquisition and fencing of the common use parcel constitutes an act of bad faith, and they are considering legal action to regain access to the property." I stared at him for a beat, then laughed once sharp and humorless. "You're telling me they're suing me for buying a piece of land they never owned?" He didn't blink. "They believe the property was established as a de facto easement through historical use and community reliance." "De facto easement?" I repeated. "They used it for bake sales and folding chair meetings. That doesn't make it theirs." "I'm not here to argue," he said, adjusting his tie. "I'm here to serve a notice of intent. They're requesting you allow temporary access pending review." I didn't take the envelope he was holding out. "Tell them to review the county's property database. It's public. And tell them to stop wasting money on lawyers when they should be fixing the potholes on Briar Lane." He set the envelope on the porch rail and left without another word. I opened it after he was gone. It was exactly what he said, a formal notice of intent to pursue legal action. But what caught my attention was the letterhead. The HOA had officially hired outside counsel. That meant they were using community dues to fund this little tantrum. I decided it was time to pull in some backup. The next afternoon, I called up someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Tina Alvarez. We'd worked together when I was still doing maintenance for the city. She'd gone on to become a zoning compliance officer and had a mind like a steel trap. I filled her in, skipping the drama and sticking to the facts. "You've got them boxed in pretty tight," she said, tapping her pen against her notepad. "But if they're using HOA funds to pay for a legal challenge against a private citizen, they're walking a razor's edge." "Can I file something?" I asked. "Stop them from using community money?" "Not directly," she said. "But if you can find evidence that they approved that expenditure without a vote from dues-paying members, you've got a solid case for misappropriation of funds." That gave me an idea. I went to the county clerk's office and requested the public record of HOA financial filings. While most HOAs aren't required to disclose every dime, they do have to report annual budgets and large expenditures if they're incorporated. Oak Summit was. And sure enough, there it was, an amended line item listed as Legal Consultation Services Urgent Fund Allocation, approved by 3 signatures. No member vote noted. It was dated 2 days after Verona's arrest. Armed with that, I called a neighborhood meeting. Not on the old lot, of course. I held it in my front yard, under a canvas tarp strung between 2 trees. I wasn't expecting much, maybe 4 or 5 curious neighbors, but by the time I finished setting up folding chairs, nearly 24 people had shown up. I waited until everyone quieted down, then held up the financial record. "This," I said, "is where your dues are going. To fight a lawsuit against me for buying land the HOA never owned." Murmurs spread through the crowd. "And here's the kicker," I continued. "They never held a vote. 3 people, Verona and 2 board members, signed off on thousands of dollars in legal fees without notifying the rest of you." A woman near the back raised her hand. "Can they do that?" "They aren't supposed to," I said. "Which means if you want to stop them, you can. The bylaws allow for special elections if enough members petition for it." James, the retired firefighter who lived 2 houses down, stood up. "How many signatures do we need?" 15% of the neighborhood," I said. "That's 23 homes." He looked around. "We've got that right here." A ripple of agreement rolled through the group. Someone passed around a clipboard. 5 minutes later, it came back to me filled with names. I filed the petition that Monday. The board tried to block it, of course. Claimed it was improperly formatted. Said the signatures weren't verified. But the city clerk who processed it, an old colleague of Tina's, confirmed it met all requirements. So the election was scheduled for the following month. That's when things got worse. Late one night, I heard a rattling against my back fence. I checked the monitor, one of the motion-activated cameras I'd installed after the graffiti, and saw a flashlight bobbing along the property line. I slipped outside with my phone, recording the screen. Whoever it was had already slipped away by the time I reached the gate. But the next morning, I found the lock on the fence clipped and a pile of trash dumped inside the lot: broken chairs, warped plywood, even a busted microwave. I turned the footage over to the police. This time, they opened a formal investigation into criminal trespass and illegal dumping. When I mentioned the ongoing feud with the HOA and the previous arrest, the officer nodded grimly. "You might be dealing with more than a feud," he said. "This is starting to look like harassment." The neighborhood didn't take kindly to the news. Word spread faster than Verona could contain it. People began demanding transparency. Neighbors who'd once nodded politely but stayed out of HOA affairs were suddenly showing up at board meetings, asking hard questions. Then came the audit. A former accountant named Lila, sweet lady with a quiet voice and a spine of steel, volunteered to review the HOA's financial records. She requested copies under the association's own bylaws, and when Verona stalled, she filed a motion with the small claims court to compel disclosure. 2 weeks later, the court sided with her. What Lila found was damning. Thousands of dollars spent on administrative retreats that were little more than spa weekends. Reimbursements for meals at upscale restaurants. And most tellingly, repeated payments to a landscaping company owned by Verona's cousin, despite the fact that the neighborhood lawns were maintained by city contractors. By the time the special election rolled around, the HOA was in tatters. Verona was under investigation for embezzlement. The board was down to 2 members, and the legal action against me had quietly disappeared. On election day, residents lined up outside the community center. The vote wasn't even close. Every board member was replaced. I didn't run for a position, never wanted to. But I did attend the first meeting under the new leadership. They held it in my front yard, where it all started. No tents, no clipboards. Just chairs, neighbors, and a cooler full of lemonade. The new president, A soft-spoken engineer named Malik stood up and addressed the group. "We're not here to control anyone," he said. "We're here to keep the lights on and the sidewalks safe. That's it." The applause was loud and genuine. For the first time in years, Oak Summit felt like a neighborhood again, not a fiefdom. As for the shed, still standing, still solid. And now, officially grandfathered in by the new board, unanimously approved, with a little note in the minutes that read, "A well-built shed is a beautiful thing." The first few weeks after the election felt like spring pushing through a long, stubborn winter. Neighbors who used to avoid eye contact during morning walks now lingered on sidewalks, chatting with coffee cups in hand. Kids played ball in the cul-de-sac without anyone yelling about noise ordinances. The whole place seemed to breathe easier, like someone had finally opened a window in a stale room. But the calm didn't last. It started with a phone call. I was sorting through some spare lumber in the back of the shed when I heard the landline ring from inside the house. I still kept it around mostly for utility calls, but that day it came in handy. I picked up, expecting some telemarketer or maybe Lila with another update on the audit. "Mr. Jensen?" The voice was deep, formal, and unfamiliar. "This is Detective Roy Danner, Cedar County Financial Crimes Unit. I'd like to ask you a few questions about the Oak Summit Homeowners Association." I straightened up, wiping sawdust from my palms. "Sure," I said, already heading inside. "What's this regarding?" "Multiple residents have reported irregularities with HOA funds. We've opened a formal investigation into potential fraud and misuse of community funds. Your name was mentioned as someone with first-hand knowledge." I agreed to meet him the next day at the station. When I arrived, he led me into a room that looked nothing like the ones you see in crime shows. No one-way mirrors, no flickering lights. Just beige walls, a legal pad, and a pitcher of lukewarm water. He flipped open a file. According to the audit submitted by a Ms. Alvarez and corroborated by several residents, the previous HOA board diverted over $20,000 in community funds to non-approved purposes. That includes personal travel, inflated invoices, and payments to vendors with no filed contracts. "That tracks," I said, leaning back. "There's more, though." I explained how Verona had tried to have me fined for a shed that had all the proper permits, how she'd targeted me with false complaints, then used HOA funds to hire a lawyer to sue me over land she never owned. I handed over a copy of the parcel deed, the footage of her vandalizing the shed, and the notarized petition that led to the board's removal. Danner nodded as he scribbled something down. "We've already pulled subpoenaed bank records from the HOA's account," he said. "But your documentation fills in a lot of blanks. You mentioned a landscaping company paid through the HOA?" "Yeah," I said. "Verona's cousin's outfit. They were billing for monthly work that either wasn't done or was entirely unnecessary. Most of us mow our own lawns." He looked up from his notes. "Did you know that same company also received emergency maintenance funds after a fabricated storm cleanup last year?" I blinked. "We didn't even get rain that month." "Exactly." 2 days later, the charges came down. Verona was arrested again, this time for felony embezzlement, misuse of public funds, and conspiracy to defraud. Her cousin, the so-called landscaper, was picked up outside a gas station in a rusty van with no plates. The third board member, a guy named Brent who always nodded along at meetings but never said much, turned state's witness in exchange for immunity. The neighborhood was stunned, but not surprised. It was like finding mold behind wallpaper you always suspected was hiding something. The new board held an emergency meeting to address the damage. Malik, the new president, stood up at the front of the community center, not the old lot, but the city-owned rec room they'd rented. "We've reviewed the financial state of the HOA," he said. "Between the legal retainers Verona authorized and the fraudulent reimbursements, we're down nearly $30,000. And the reserve fund? Almost empty." A man in the second row, Sam, a carpenter with 3 kids and a mortgage that barely kept up with inflation, shook his head. "So what happens now?" "We filed a civil claim to recover the funds," Malik said. "But that process takes time. In the meantime, we need to vote on whether to raise dues temporarily or suspend non-essential services." Grumbling spread through the room. Everyone wanted accountability, but no one wanted to pay for someone else's theft. That's when I stood up. "I'll cover the shortfall," I said. "Not all of it, but enough to get us back on our feet for the next 3 months. On one condition." All eyes turned to me. "The HOA charter gets rewritten. From scratch. No more loopholes, No more unchecked authority. And any future board must include at least one resident with no prior board experience. Malik looked stunned. August, that's generous. But it's not about generosity, I said. It's about making sure no one like Verona ever gets that kind of power again. The room erupted into applause. The next week, a volunteer committee of residents, not lawyers, not bureaucrats, sat around James' garage with laptops, old binders, and a pot of black coffee. We stripped the charter down to the studs. Every clause that had allowed Verona to act unilaterally was cut. Every vague phrase like aesthetic harmony and community uniformity was replaced with clear language. By the end of the month, the new charter was ratified by a 2/3 majority. But just as things were starting to stabilize, another storm rolled in. One afternoon, Tina called me with a tone I hadn't heard before, tight, urgent. "You need to see this," she said. I drove past the county clerk's office and noticed a file being pulled. "It's a request for development zoning on the lot you bought." I furrowed my brow. "That's not possible. I didn't file anything." "No," she said, "but someone pretending to represent you did." I drove down to the clerk's office and asked to see the file. Sure enough, someone had submitted a zoning variance request under my name, claiming I intended to develop the lot into a commercial parking area. It included a forged signature, a fake LLC, and a design sketch done with enough technical detail to fool a casual reviewer. They tried to make it look like I was flipping the land for profit, I said aloud, scanning the papers. The clerk narrowed her eyes. "You want me to call the sheriff?" "Already on it." Back at the precinct, Detective Danner reviewed the documents and recognized the name of the notary listed on the filing, a man with a record of fraudulent real estate activity. He was picked up the next day and, under pressure, revealed that Verona's cousin had paid him to file the request before his arrest. It was part of an attempt to create a paper trail that discredited me and opened the property to a hostile claim. "They wanted to make it look like you were using insider knowledge to profit," Danner said. "A preemptive smear campaign. But why keep pushing?" I asked. "They'd already lost." He shook his head. "Because people like that don't know how to stop. Power isn't something they give up, it's something they have to be dragged away from." The forged filing was shredded, and a court order was issued to prevent any future zoning changes on the parcel without in-person verification by the owner, that's me, for the next 5 years. I installed a second fence. Taller. Reinforced. With a keypad lock and a motion sensor that lit up the whole lot like a stage when triggered. I wasn't playing defense anymore. I was building a fortress. The community, for its part, rallied. A group of neighbors came by one Saturday and planted a small garden on the edge of the lot, carrots, tomatoes, even a few berry bushes. They called it the Reset Patch, a symbol of the neighborhood's new beginning. I didn't ask for it. I didn't need it. But I appreciated it. Verona was indicted on 4 felony counts and entered a plea deal that included restitution, probation, and a 5-year ban from serving on any housing-related board. Her cousin pled guilty and received a suspended sentence and mandatory community service under Malik's supervision, ironically, pulling weeds from the very common areas he'd once charged to mow. Life didn't return to normal, it got better. No more anonymous complaints about grass length. No more surprise fines. Just people living, fixing, planting, and waving. And my shed? Still standing. Still mine. Still casting a long, stubborn shadow right across the empty space where Verona's fake authority used to sit. Roughly 6 weeks after the last attempt to discredit me with that forged zoning request, things around Oak Summit had settled into a rhythm that felt more like a neighborhood and less like a battleground. The new board was transparent, meetings were open, and residents actually looked forward to them. I'd even started seeing lawn chairs and lemonade pitchers pop up during Saturday get-togethers, which used to be strictly frowned upon. But trouble, I've learned, doesn't always knock. Sometimes it slips in through the back gate. It started with a letter, an official-looking envelope delivered to my mailbox without postage, no return address. I opened it at the kitchen table. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message that read, "Enjoy your little victory. It won't last." No name. No signature. Just that unnerving little statement, like someone had torn it from the middle of a threat and left the rest for me to imagine. I never told Malik or the board about it. I didn't want to stir another wave of fear just as things were calming down. Instead, I did what any stubborn ex-city worker with an overbuilt shed and a reinforced fence would do. I installed a third camera, this one hidden in a bird feeder overlooking the street. For a while, nothing happened. Days passed, then weeks. I kept working on projects, repairing an old bench, sealing the shed's roof, organizing tools by type and size. Then one night in early October, just after midnight, I caught movement on the new camera. A man in a hoodie, crouched low, walked along the side of my fence. He paused, looked around, then pulled something from his jacket. It took me a second to recognize what it was: a small gas can. He doused the base of the fence, then struck a match. The flame flared for a moment, licking up the treated wood, but it didn't spread the way he expected. I'd coated the fence in fire retardant sealant just weeks earlier. The flame sputtered, caught briefly on a dry weed, then died out. The camera caught his face as he leaned in, confused. He pulled his hood back for a better look. That's when I froze. It wasn't Verona. It wasn't her cousin. It was Leonard McCrae, a former board member who'd resigned 3 years ago after a failed recall attempt. He'd always kept to himself after that, mowing his lawn twice a week and glaring at anyone who parked too close to his driveway. I hadn't even known he was involved in any of this. The next morning, I went straight to the police with the footage. Detective Danner met me in the lobby of the station, took one look at the video, and asked if I had time to make a statement. I did. Later that afternoon, officers executed a search warrant at Leonard's home. They found a folder in his garage with printouts of my property records, photos of my shed taken from different angles, and a handwritten list of possible retaliation options. Spray paint and gas cans were in plain view, along with a burner phone link to the forged zoning request from weeks earlier. Leonard was arrested and charged with attempted arson, stalking, and conspiracy to commit property damage. During questioning, he admitted to orchestrating the forged zoning request through a contact of Verona's cousin. He also confessed that Verona had reached out to him after her indictment, blaming me for everything and encouraging him to do something while there's still time. That was the moment everything changed. See, up until then, Verona's crimes were financial, unethical, manipulative, but mostly about greed. But arson? That crossed into something else entirely. The district attorney's office reopened her case and added new charges: incitement to commit a felony, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to intimidate a witness. That last one? That was me. Her plea deal was revoked. This time, she didn't get out on bail. The trial started 2 months later, in the small but packed courtroom at the county courthouse. Verona sat in her tailored suit, flanked by 2 defense attorneys who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I was called to testify early on, walking past her on my way to the stand. She didn't look at me, not once. The prosecutor asked me to recount everything from the shed complaint all the way to the arson attempt. I told the truth. Every petty citation, every forged document, every late-night camera feed. I handed over the deed, the camera footage, and my records of city permits. When they played the clip of Leonard lighting the match, the room went silent. The judge's jaw tightened. Leonard testified the next day. He didn't try to minimize what he did. He explained how Verona told him I was destroying the community from within, how she insisted that I'd stolen HOA land, and that if no one stopped me, Oak Summit would fall apart. His voice cracked as he said it. He wasn't a villain, not really. He was just someone who'd been manipulated by one. The jury came back in under 3 hours. Verona was found guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 7 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 4. She was also ordered to pay restitution to the HOA for every cent she stole, plus damages to me personally. Leonard received a lighter sentence, 18 months in a minimum security facility, followed by mandatory psychiatric counseling. After the verdict, the community held an open meeting, not for business, but to talk. Just talk. People asked questions, shared concerns, laughed, and even cried. Someone brought donuts. No one took minutes. It was the most honest meeting I'd ever seen in a neighborhood. Malik stood up near the end. "We've been through hell," he said, "but we didn't give up. We didn't let fear keep us quiet. And because of that, we're still standing stronger, smarter, and more united than we've ever been." After the meeting, James approached me with a battered manila folder under his arm. "Found these in my garage," he said. "Old HOA maps and meeting records. Turns out, your shed? That space used to be a community garden 40 years ago." I raised an eyebrow. "Really?" He nodded. "Way before Verona's time. Back when people actually grew things together instead of measuring grass height." The next weekend, I invited a few neighbors over. We cleared the lot next to the shed, dug up the soil, and started planting. Tomatoes, beans, herbs. Malik brought a fig tree sapling. Even Lila stopped by with her niece, who painted a wooden sign that read, "Oak Summit grows together." I mounted it on a post near the edge of the garden. The shed didn't just stand anymore, it overlooked something new, something growing. A reminder that even after the worst storms, the ground can still bloom. And the lot? Still mine. Still locked. Still quiet. But now, every Saturday morning, I open the gate. No permits. No fines. No threats. Just neighbors, shovels, and the smell of turned earth.